Love rarely enters a man's life wearing diamonds. Sometimes, it arrives unnoticed, carrying a tray and realizing he has forgotten to eat. Every beautiful woman in Manhattan seemed to be inside Cassian Moretti's ballroom that night. Actresses laughed beneath crystal chandeliers. Heiresses crossed their legs in silk gowns and watched him over the rims of champagne glasses. One woman spoke Italian just to make him look twice. He didn't. Cassian stood near the center of the room in a black suit cut precisely to his broad frame, accepting compliments with the patience of a man enduring a necessary medical procedure. At 35, he controlled businesses across the city, commanded loyalty without raising his voice, and inspired enough fear that people lowered their conversations whenever he passed. Yet surrounded by hundreds of guests, he looked like the loneliest man in the building. The brunette has mentioned her family's hotels 4 times. Theo Russo appeared beside him, stealing an appetizer from a passing tray. I think the 5th mention comes with a marriage proposal. Cassian watched the woman approach again, her smile polished and deliberate. Tell her I'm allergic to hotels. Theo nearly choked. You own 3. Then tell her I've suffered enough. A few feet away, Alara Quinn lowered her face to hide a smile. She had been replacing empty champagne glasses and had no business listening. But Cassian Moretti's dry humor was the first surprising thing she had discovered about him in 8 months of working at his estate. The second was that he had not eaten anything all evening. Alara noticed details other people missed. It came from years of caring for a sick father, stretching grocery money, and learning that exhaustion often hid behind the words "I'm fine." Cassian had touched his temple 3 times in 20 minutes. His whiskey glass had been refilled twice. The plate in front of him remained untouched. Around him, women competed for his attention. One brushed imaginary lint from his sleeve. Another leaned close enough for her perfume to reach the service corridor. Cassian remained courteous, distant, almost painfully controlled. Nobody asked whether he was hungry. Why are you staring at him? Another maid whispered as they passed behind the velvet curtain. Alara adjusted the tray against her hip. I'm checking whether he plans to eat before sunrise. He's Cassian Moretti. Men like him don't need food. That explains a lot about wealthy men. Alara returned to the dining room just as the celebrity chef presented the main course. The dish arrived beneath a silver cover, decorated with edible flowers and a sauce that had taken 6 hours to prepare. Guests leaned forward, eager to praise it before tasting it. Cassian cut one small piece, brought it to his mouth, then set down his fork. His expression barely changed, but Alara saw his jaw tighten. A woman beside him touched his wrist. Is something wrong? Cassian removed his hand without embarrassing her. No. That single word ended the conversation. Theo glanced at the untouched plate. You haven't eaten since yesterday. Cassian reached for his whiskey. I'm not hungry. That isn't the same thing. For one brief second, something cold moved behind Cassian's eyes. Not anger, but an old memory closing a door. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and surveyed the table where everyone had gathered to impress him. Take it away. I've lost my appetite. The room resumed breathing only after he left. Alara watched his untouched dinner being carried toward the kitchen, followed by enough food to feed 50 people. She should have finished her shift, collected her coat, and gone home. Instead, she looked at the dark hallway leading to Cassian's private office and made one small decision no one had asked her to make. Before that night ended, the maid nobody noticed would place a simple dinner in front of the man no woman could impress. And one bite would force Cassian Moretti to remember the part of himself he had buried years ago. The kitchen exploded into chaos the moment Cassian left the ballroom. Plates clattered against stainless steel, servers hurried through swinging doors, and the celebrity chef paced beside the untouched entree as though someone had insulted his bloodline. He didn't even taste the sauce. Chef Bernard stabbed a finger toward the abandoned plate. 6 hours. 6 hours for that reduction. Theo entered backward while arguing with a security guard, stepped directly into a rolling dessert cart, and sent a 3-tier chocolate cake sliding onto his shoes. Silence fell for half a second. He looked down at the frosting covering his polished leather. Well, at least something tonight found me irresistible. Alara pressed her lips together, but the laugh escaped anyway. Theo caught it, pointed at her with a chocolate-covered hand, and nodded solemnly. Finally, an honest review. Mrs. Beatrice Vale appeared in the doorway with the expression of a woman who had spent 30 years managing rich men and had lost patience with all of them. Mr. Russo, stop wearing the dessert. Miss Quinn, help clear the service station. Chef Bernard, lower your voice before the souffle collapses from fear. Everyone moved. Even Theo. Alara carried the untouched plates toward the disposal bins, each one holding enough food to cover her family's groceries for a week. She hated waste, especially the kind disguised as luxury. When she reached Cassian's place setting, she paused. The meat had barely been cut. The whiskey was gone. Mrs. Vale noticed. His office tray needs to go up in 10 minutes. Chef Bernard pulled off his apron. He rejected dinner. I'm not cooking another plate for a man determined to starve dramatically. He isn't dramatic, Theo offered, scraping frosting from his cuff. He's emotionally constipated. Mrs. Vale silenced him with one glance, then turned to Alara. Toast. Cold cuts. Something simple. Alara glanced toward the clock. It was 12:23. He won't eat that. The room grew quieter. Chef Bernard's eyebrows rose. And the maid has diagnosed him? Alara kept her voice even. No. I watched him ignore everything complicated on the table. If we send more of the same, it comes back untouched. Kindness rarely begins with a grand sacrifice. Sometimes it is simply refusing to let someone go to bed hungry when everyone else has decided his hunger is his own problem. Mrs. Vale studied her for several seconds, then stepped aside. You have 15 minutes. Alara opened the pantry. Fresh tomatoes, basil, butter, a lemon. Dried pasta would have been faster, but a container of prepared pasta dough sat in the cooler, left over from the afternoon service. She rolled it thin, cut narrow ribbons, and worked without wasting a movement. The dish was not elegant. It was warm, bright, and familiar, the kind of meal her mother used to make when money was short but pride remained intact. Theo leaned against the counter, watching her toss the pasta in the pan. You're serving that to a man who owns 3 restaurants with Michelin stars. Alara added basil and a little lemon zest. No, I'm serving it to a man who hasn't eaten since yesterday. Theo's amusement faded into something more thoughtful. Alara arranged the plate, added toasted bread, and poured black tea instead of whiskey. Before placing the tray in the service lift, she slipped a small note beside the cup. Dinner doesn't have to be perfect. It only has to be warm. 10 minutes later, one of Cassian's guards returned. His face revealed nothing, but his eyes went directly to Alara. Mr. Moretti wants to know who cooked the pasta. Behind her, Theo slowly smiled. Alara wiped her hands on her apron, suddenly aware that one simple meal had opened a door she might not be able to close. Cassian Moretti had survived betrayals, bullets, and men who smiled while planning his downfall, but the scent rising from one simple plate of pasta reached a place none of them ever had. Alara followed the guard through the quiet hallway, aware of Theo trailing several steps behind her with the enthusiasm of a man who had just discovered the evening's best entertainment. Cassian's office door stood open. He sat behind a dark wooden desk, his jacket discarded over a chair and the first 2 buttons of his shirt undone. The nearly empty plate rested beside a stack of contracts. That surprised Alara more than the armed men outside. Cassian looked at her, then at the folded note beside his tea. You cooked this. His voice was calm, but something in his expression had shifted. I did. Why? Alara glanced at the plate. Because you were hungry. I told everyone I wasn't. People say many things when they're tired. Theo covered a cough that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. Cassian's eyes moved toward him. Leave. I'm part of the emotional support team. You're about to become part of the unemployment statistics. Theo raised both hands and backed through the door, though not before giving Alara an encouraging nod. The room became quieter after he left. Cassian picked up his fork and studied the last ribbon of pasta. The basil, lemon, and butter had brought back a memory he had spent years burying. His mother standing over a dented stove, flour on her cheek, telling him that a warm meal could make even a dangerous night feel survivable. Some memories returned as pain. This one returned as hunger. Where did you learn to cook? Cassian's attention settled on Alara with unsettling precision. My mother taught me. I studied culinary arts for a while after that. For a while. Life changed. She offered no further explanation, and he noticed that too. Most people filled silence around Cassian because they feared what he might do with it. Alara let it remain. that made her either brave or foolish. He had not yet decided which. What do you want? Cassian leaned back, measuring her reaction. A bonus? A better position? Money for your silence about tonight. Alera's brow creased. My silence about you eating pasta? People usually want something when they do me a favor. Then they aren't doing you a favor. They're making an investment. For the first time, Cassian had no immediate reply. She looked around the immaculate office, then returned her gaze to him. Since you asked, the kitchen needs a new dishwasher. The current one sounds like it's preparing for a violent death every time we turn it on. His mouth almost moved. Almost. That's all. And you should stop replacing dinner with whiskey. It makes everyone else stay late. Cassian set down the fork. He was accustomed to obedience, flattery, and fear. Alera offered none of them. Yet there was no disrespect in her voice. Only the irritating honesty of someone who had noticed he was human. Starting tomorrow, you'll prepare my evening meals. Alera folded her hands in front of her apron. That isn't part of my current job. It is now. Then. The salary is different now. The silence that followed could have frightened more powerful people. Alera simply waited. Cassian stared at her for 3 long seconds before a low, unexpected laugh escaped him. Outside the office, Theo froze in the hallway. No one in the Moretti estate had heard that sound in years, and it had taken one unnoticed maid, one warm dinner, and a request for overtime pay to bring it back. By 9 the next morning, Alera had revised Cassian Moretti's contract 3 times, and by 9:15, the man who could force entire boardrooms into silence was staring at her handwritten notes like they were a personal challenge. You crossed out the availability clause. His thumb rested on the page. Because as needed usually means whenever the rich person remembers everyone else has a life. Theo, seated near the window with coffee he had not been invited to drink, lowered the cup to hide his smile. Cassian looked at Alera instead. She stood across from his desk in a clean gray uniform, her expression steady despite the 2 guards outside and the reputation sitting in front of her. You also added overtime, 2 evenings off each week, and authority to refuse menu changes after 10. Food needs time. So do people. Cassian had negotiated shipping contracts worth millions with men who brought armed escorts. None had corrected his employment policies in blue ink. Anything else? Alera turned the final page. The kitchen dishwasher. You mentioned it last night. It threatened a line cook this morning. Theo nodded gravely. I heard it. Sounded personal. Cassian signed the contract without looking away from her. Have it replaced. Alera collected the papers, but he kept one hand on the top sheet. Tonight, 8 o'clock. My shift ends at 7. The new agreement begins today. Then I'll be here at 8. A faint satisfaction moved through his eyes, quickly hidden. Alera noticed anyway. That evening, she served braised chicken with rosemary, roasted potatoes, and green beans instead of something designed to impress a food critic. Cassian arrived exactly on time. His tie was gone, his sleeves rolled to his forearms, and for a moment, he looked less like a feared businessman and more like a tired man who had remembered there was somewhere he was expected. Alera placed the plate in front of him and turned toward the door. Stay. The word stopped her, though its tone was quieter than an order. Is there a problem with the meal? I wouldn't know. You haven't explained it. She glanced at the empty chair across from him. The chicken is chicken. I trusted you could identify it. His mouth nearly curved. Sit down, Alera. The use of her first name changed the room in a way neither of them acknowledged. She took the chair, but left the table between them. Cassian tasted the sauce. Rosemary. And lemon. My mother used rosemary. Alera caught the slight tightening in his hand around the fork. She did not ask what happened to her. Instead, she explained how resting the meat kept it tender and how rushing a dish usually ruined what patience could have saved. Cassian studied her as though the lesson had nothing to do with cooking. He told himself his interest was practical. The lie was becoming less convincing by the minute. Alera reached for the pepper grinder at the same moment he did. Their fingers touched. Hers were warm, lightly roughened from kitchen work. Cassian's hand remained beneath hers for one breath too long. Alera slowly pulled back, and his gaze followed the movement. Attraction did not always arrive through a kiss. Sometimes it announced itself in the sudden awareness that a few inches of polished wood were no longer enough distance. She rose before the silence could become dangerous. At the door, Cassian's voice caught her again. Tomorrow, eat with me. Alera looked over her shoulder. Is that part of the job? For once, he did not answer like her employer. No, it's an invitation. And that was precisely why she could not dismiss it. Alara accepted the invitation the next evening, but only after reminding Cassian that dinner shared with an employee was still a complication, no matter how expensive the table. He responded by placing a second plate across from his and moving a folder of contracts out of the way. Then tonight we'll discuss food, not business. She sat with visible caution, as though the empty chair had become more dangerous than any armed guard in the hallway. The meal was simple: roasted salmon, wild rice, and vegetables with too much garlic because Alara believed restraint was overrated in at least one area of life. Cassian took a bite and lifted one eyebrow. You're trying to kill me. With garlic. My enemies will smell me from 3 blocks away. Then they'll know you finally ate dinner. His quiet laugh came more easily this time. Love rarely begins with declarations. More often, it appears in the moment two people stop performing and discover they enjoy the person left behind. Over the next several evenings, dinner became the only hour Cassian protected from meetings. At first they spoke about ingredients, then books, then the places Alara wanted to visit once her father's medical bills were no longer the center of every decision. She admitted she loved old detective movies, but never guessed the killer correctly. Cassian seemed offended on behalf of logic. The gardener did it in the first 10 minutes. Alara pointed her fork at him. You say that because you already watched it. I say it because the gardener wore gloves indoors. Some people have cold hands. Some people hide evidence. She laughed, and something inside him loosened at the sound. Cassian told her almost nothing about his work, but she learned other things. He disliked sweet coffee, slept badly, and pretended the orange cat behind the guest house was not his. It lives on the property, he insisted when Alara found him leaving salmon beside the back steps. So do the groundskeepers. You don't feed them imported fish. They have salaries. The cat has you. He looked down at the animal winding around his ankles and surrendered the argument without admitting defeat. The attraction between them grew in small, inconvenient ways. Cassian noticed how Alara tucked loose hair behind her ear when concentrating. She noticed the rare softness in his face whenever he spoke about his mother. One night, while she adjusted a sauce at the sideboard, she held out a spoon. Taste. Cassian could have taken it from her. Instead, he leaned forward and tasted directly from the spoon still in her hand. The distance between them vanished. His eyes lifted to hers slowly, and Alara forgot what she had intended to say. There was nothing inappropriate in the touch, yet the air changed as sharply as if someone had opened a door during winter. Cassian's gaze dropped briefly to her mouth, then returned to her eyes. He stepped back first. That restraint unsettled her more than boldness would have. A powerful man could take space without thinking. Cassian was choosing to give it back. Alara placed the spoon down with fingers that were no longer steady. The sauce needs salt. It doesn't. His voice had lowered. You didn't really taste it. I tasted enough. She looked away before he could see the effect of those words. When dinner ended, Alara reached the door before Cassian spoke again. Have you ever considered staying here for a reason that has nothing to do with employment? She turned, pulse tightening beneath her calm expression. Yes. Hope flickered across his face. Alara rested one hand on the doorframe. And that is exactly why I need to be careful. She left him alone at the table, but for the first time, Cassian understood that her hesitation was not rejection. It was desire asking for respect before it dared become anything more. The storm arrived just after sunset, hard enough to rattle the windows and knock out power to half the estate. Within seconds, the ballroom went dark, the security system switched to backup, and someone in the West Hall screamed because a decorative statue had fallen against a curtain. Cassian handled the crisis with the calm of a man accustomed to worse. He redirected the guards, checked the perimeter, and dismissed 3 anxious calls before walking into the kitchen with his sleeves already rolled. Alara stood beneath the glow of 2 candles, trying to finish dinner on a gas burner while the electric ovens remained useless. You should be upstairs, she murmured, pressing dough beneath her palms. You have people for this. Cassian glanced at the smoking pan near the sink. Apparently, my people are losing a war against dinner. That pan belongs to Theo. That explains the smoke. As if summoned by accusation, Theo leaned through the doorway holding a flashlight backward. Good news. I found the flashlight. Alara looked at the beam shining into his own chest. We can see that. He corrected it with dignity. I was testing morale. Cassian pointed toward the hall. Test it somewhere else. Theo disappeared, muttering about a hostile work environment. Alara returned to the dough, but Cassian moved to the counter beside her. Tell me what to do. She studied him carefully. Have you ever made pasta? I own restaurants. That was not the question. 5 minutes later, flour covered the front of his black shirt. One strip of dough clung to his wrist, and Alara had stopped pretending she was not amused. Cassian examined the mess with growing suspicion. People fear me in 3 states. Do they know what you've done to that ravioli? She reached across him and rescued the folded pasta before he crushed it completely. Power had always kept people at a distance from Cassian. Failure, Alara discovered, brought her dangerously close. She placed her hands over his and guided the pressure. Gentler. His fingers relaxed beneath hers. Like this. Better. You sound surprised. I've seen men with less confidence lose fights to bread dough. A low laugh moved through him, warm and unguarded. Then the humor faded, not into discomfort, but awareness. Alara stood between his arms, her back nearly touching his chest. The candlelight softened the hard lines of his face. Rain struck the windows, but neither of them looked away. Cassian's hand remained beside hers on the counter, close enough to touch without claiming the space. Alara. Her name sounded different in his voice now. Not an instruction. Not part of a contract. A question. She turned slowly. He was close enough that she could see the restraint in his eyes, and that restraint mattered more than desire alone ever could. May I kiss you? The simple respect of it stole the clever answer she usually kept ready. Her gaze dropped to his mouth, then lifted again. Yes. Cassian leaned in, giving her time to change her mind. Their breath mingled. His hand settled lightly at her waist. The distance narrowed to almost nothing, until Theo burst through the door carrying a fire extinguisher. Something is burning. Alara jerked back and covered her mouth as laughter escaped. Cassian closed his eyes with the patience of a man imagining several legal methods of revenge. Theo looked between them, then at the perfectly safe stove. Oh, leave, Cassian murmured. Theo retreated immediately. The unfinished kiss remained between them, more dangerous now because both knew exactly how much they wanted it. Alara gathered the pasta with trembling fingers. At the doorway, Cassian's voice stopped her. Tomorrow night, don't come as my employee. She turned. Then what am I coming as? His gaze held hers. My guest. Alara refused the invitation the next morning, not because she lacked interest, but because attraction became dangerous when one person controlled the other's paycheck. Cassian received the answer in his office without interruption, though Theo watched from the sofa with the tense curiosity of a man observing someone approach an unexploded device. You asked me to come as your guest, Alara began, placing the sign meal schedule on the desk, but I still work in your house. That makes it difficult to know whether I'm truly free to say no. Cassian's expression did not harden. If anything, the honesty seemed to make him listen more closely. You just said no. Because I'm stubborn. I noticed. Theo lifted his coffee. We all noticed. Cassian silenced him with a glance, then returned his attention to Alara. What would make the invitation fair? She had expected persuasion, perhaps even offense. The question caught her unprepared. I don't know. Think about it. He did not reach for her hand or soften the moment with charm. Until then, dinner remains dinner. Respect is often mistaken for grand protection, but sometimes it is simply removing the pressure from a choice before asking someone to make it. By noon, Cassian had called the estate's attorney. By 5, Alara received 2 separate documents. The first formally ended her position on the household staff with full severance, and used vacation pay, and a written offer to return if she ever chose to. The second established her as an independent culinary consultant hired through the estate's management company, not by Cassian personally. Her hours were fixed, either side could cancel the agreement, and Cassian had no authority over her pay or termination. She read every page twice before looking across the library at him. You arranged all of this in one afternoon? Cassian rested one hand against the desk. 3 attorneys arranged it. I only made them work faster. Theo leaned against a bookshelf. The first 2 became visibly uncomfortable when he used the phrase romantic conflict of interest. Alara closed the folder. This still doesn't mean I'm agreeing to a date. Cassian held her gaze without moving closer. No. It means refusing me will not cost you a job. That answer decided more than he knew. Their first real date took place 2 nights later at a small photography gallery in Soho, far from his restaurants and the social circles that treated his presence like a public event. Cassian wore a dark sweater instead of a suit. Alara studied him near the entrance. You almost look normal. Almost. Don't become arrogant on the first date. I thought arrogance was part of my appeal. Your cat has more charm. He glanced toward her. That animal is not mine. Of course. It merely lives at your house, eats your salmon, and follows you into meetings. Cassian surrendered with a quiet smile. Without the estate around them, conversation came easier. They debated which photograph deserved the largest wall, shared coffee from a paper cup, and stood too close in front of an image neither had really been studying. The unfinished kiss from the kitchen lingered between them, but Cassian made no attempt to complete it. That patience warmed Alara more than insistence would have. Near the final exhibit, a woman in an ivory suit approached. Serafina Loran was as elegant as the photographs surrounding her and twice as composed. Her eyes moved from Cassian to Alara, taking in the truth immediately. So this is why you declined dinner with my father. Cassian's jaw tightened. Serafina. She smiled at Alara instead. Don't worry. Our families wanted a merger with wedding photos. He and I preferred honesty. Then she turned back to Cassian. You're finally looking at a person instead of evaluating an alliance. Alara should have felt threatened. Instead, Serafina's lack of cruelty made the evening feel unexpectedly real. Cassian walked Alara home without touching her until they reached her door. Did you enjoy tonight? She looked at the man who had given her every opportunity to leave. More than I planned to. He smiled, and for one suspended second, neither moved. By morning, a photograph of them leaving the gallery covered every gossip site in the city. Beneath it, the headline read, "The maid who plans to marry into the Moretti Empire." By 8 the next morning, strangers had already decided who Alara was, what she wanted, and how much they believed her dignity was worth. The photograph from the gallery spread across every gossip site in Manhattan, each headline crueler than the last. Gold digger, opportunist, ambitious maid. One article listed her father's medical debt, as if hardship were evidence of guilt. Cassian read 3 sentences before closing the tablet with enough force to crack the case. I'll have every story removed by noon. Alara stood across from his desk, arms folded. And what happens tomorrow when they write another one? Then I remove that too. That isn't a solution. It's a very expensive game of whack-a-mole. Theo, wisely positioned near the door, lowered his coffee. For the record, he would win that game. Cassian ignored him. They're attacking you because of me. They're attacking me because they think I won't answer. She placed her phone on the desk. I'm going to speak for myself. Protecting someone can look noble from a distance, but love becomes control the moment protection erases the other person's voice. Cassian's jaw tightened. Every instinct he possessed demanded action. Lawyers, phone calls, consequences. Instead, he forced his hands to remain still. What do you need? The question softened something in Alara's face. A quiet room. 10 minutes. And Theo needs to stop giving me media advice. Theo looked offended. My advice is, excellent. You told me to stare mysteriously when I don't know an answer. Mystery builds authority. It makes people think I forgot the question. That afternoon, Alara sat for a short interview with a local food journalist who had covered her community dinner project months before Cassian entered the story. She spoke about finishing culinary school, supporting her family, and opening a restaurant where no child would be turned away because a parent could not afford the bill. She never defended her right to date Cassian. She simply refused to let anyone reduce her life to him. When the interview ended, the journalist smiled. One personal question. Are you in love with Mr. Moretti? Alara held the woman's gaze. I'm still learning who he is when no one is asking him to be powerful. It was not an answer, but it was honest enough to follow Cassian into the evening. He waited for her in the estate kitchen after the staff had gone. No guards stood inside. No lawyers waited with reports. Only Cassian, 2 untouched cups of coffee, and the restraint of a man who had spent the day doing nothing because she had asked him to. You were right. He slid 1 cup toward her. I disliked it. I assumed. I nearly called 6 people. Only 6. A reluctant smile touched his mouth. I'm learning moderation. Alara moved closer. Thank you for not speaking over me. His expression turned serious. Watching them hurt you and standing still felt impossible. You didn't stand still. You listened. The space between them narrowed. Cassian's hand rose but stopped beside her face, waiting. May I? Alara answered by catching the front of his shirt and drawing him down. Their first kiss was slow at first, then deeper with every breath they had denied themselves. His palm settled carefully at her waist. Her fingers moved into his hair. Nothing was taken. Nothing was owed. When they finally separated, Cassian rested his forehead against hers. Tell me what this means. Alara's lips curved, still close to his. It does not mean I belong to you. No, his thumb brushed her cheek. It means you chose me in this moment. And for the first time, Alara knew she wanted to choose him. Again, Cassian approached romance the way he approached business, with careful planning, excessive resources, and absolutely no understanding of normal human behavior. The morning after their first kiss, Alara arrived at the kitchen to find 36 white roses covering every available counter. She stopped in the doorway, sneezed twice, and stared at Theo. Did a florist lose a custody battle? Theo glanced toward Cassian, who stood beside the espresso machine, looking unusually uncertain. He was informed that women enjoy flowers. Alara sneezed again. Some women. I'm allergic. Cassian's expression darkened as if the roses had betrayed him personally. By lunchtime, every bouquet had been removed. The next morning, a single pot of basil waited beside her cutting board with a handwritten card. Less dangerous. Alara smiled for the rest of the day. Love did not make Cassian less intimidating to the city. It simply made him strangely vulnerable to text messages. At 8:10 each evening, her phone displayed the same formal question. Have you consumed dinner? Alara finally replied. Is this my boyfriend or the Department of Homeland Security? 3 minutes passed before a yellow smiling face appeared. Theo later confessed it had taken 20 minutes to teach Cassian which expression looked warm but not unstable. Their relationship grew in moments too small for gossip columns to understand. Cassian kissed her in the service elevator when the doors closed between floors, then stepped away before they opened. He rested a hand at the small of her back when crowds pressed too close, but never used the gesture to steer her. One evening, Alara fell asleep on the library sofa while reviewing restaurant budgets. She woke beneath his jacket, her cheek against a cushion and Cassian working silently across the room so he would not disturb her. Desire remained between them, steady and unmistakable. It lived in the way his eyes followed her mouth when she tasted a sauce, in the pause before she straightened his tie, and in every kiss that deepened until restraint became a choice they made together. Cassian could have rushed her. He never did. A powerful man was accustomed to taking the shortest path toward what he wanted. A man in love learned that some distances deserve patience. The only tension he could not keep outside the estate came from his family council. They expected him to marry someone with influence, property, and the correct last name. During a private meeting, an older advisor described Alara as a distraction that would eventually become expensive. Cassian's reply remained calm enough to frighten everyone at the table. My personal life is not an asset for negotiation. He did not mention Alara again. He refused the arrangement because it was his decision, not because he needed her to become the excuse for it. When Alara learned what happened, relief came with an unexpected ache. She did not want him to fight the world in her name. She needed to know he was capable of choosing his own life. Not everyone on the Moretti Council accepted his decision quietly. Victor Hale, the oldest member at the table, watched Cassian reject the marriage arrangement without revealing a single emotion. You're changing the structure of this family for a woman who serves dinner, he observed. Cassian closed the folder in front of him. I'm changing it because men like you have confused tradition with ownership for too long. Victor offered a thin smile. Then I hope Miss Quinn is prepared for what independence costs. Cassian remembered the sentence, but not soon enough. 2 days later, she stood inside the 24-seat restaurant she planned to lease for her first public dinner. Years of savings covered part of the deposit, while a small business loan and a neighborhood development grant would pay for the equipment and renovations. It was not a gift from Cassian. Every document carried Alara Quinn's name. Years of savings covered part of the deposit, while a small business loan and a neighborhood development grant would pay for the equipment and renovations. It was not a gift from Cassian. Every document carried Alara Quinn's name. The owner avoided her eyes while returning her deposit. I'm sorry, Ms. Quinn. The agreement is canceled. We signed the papers yesterday. His fingers tightened around the envelope. Someone made it clear that leasing to you would be bad for business. Alara went still. Who? The man looked toward the window, too frightened to answer directly. Someone powerful. Someone who doesn't want you proving you can stand on your own. For the first time since kissing Cassian, Alara wondered whether the man teaching himself to love her had ever truly stopped trying to control the world around her. Alara entered Cassian's office carrying the return deposit like evidence at a trial. He looked up from his desk, and the warmth that usually appeared when he saw her vanished the moment he noticed her expression. Did you contact the owner of my restaurant? She placed the envelope between them. Cassian did not touch it. No, someone powerful convinced him to cancel my lease less than 24 hours after I signed. His gaze sharpened. What exactly did he tell you? That someone didn't want me proving I could stand on my own. The words landed harder than anger because Cassian understood why she had come to him first. His influence had solved problems before she knew they existed. He had replaced equipment, rewritten contracts, and placed protection around her life so quietly that care and control sometimes wore the same face. It wasn't me. Alara searched his expression, wanting certainty and finding only the dangerous composure he used with everyone else. Can you honestly tell me you've never changed something behind my back because you thought it was best for me? Silence answered before he could. Trust is rarely destroyed by one enormous lie. More often, it weakens beneath a history of small decisions made without permission. Cassian stood, but Alara stepped back. The movement stopped him immediately. I need time. She removed the estate kitchen key from her purse and set it beside the envelope. Alara, don't send anyone after me. His hands tightened at his sides. Every instinct urged him to close the distance, demand 5 more minutes, and make her listen. Instead, he forced himself to remain behind the desk. All right. She left without looking back. For the next 48 hours, Cassian did the most difficult thing power had ever required of him. Nothing. He did not appear outside her apartment. He did not assign guards she had not requested. He did not call until she answered. He investigated quietly and discovered the truth. Victor Hale had pressured the landlord to cancel the lease, hoping humiliation would drive Alara away and make Cassian useful to the council again. The landlord, frightened by the threat of a lawsuit, turned over Victor's voicemail, 2 emails from his assistant, and a written demand warning that the building would lose Moretti-connected business unless Alara's agreement disappeared. The old Cassian would have destroyed the man's career before breakfast. The man who was learning how to love her copied the evidence, placed it in a plain folder, and carried it to her apartment himself. When she opened the door, he remained in the hallway. I found who did it. He handed her the file. What happens next is your decision. Alara scanned the first page. You're not going to fix it? The question held more surprise than accusation. I want to. His jaw flexed. But you asked me not to take the wheel. With the evidence, Alara hired an attorney. Her lawyer sent the landlord and Victor a preservation notice and a demand letter alleging intentional interference with a signed commercial lease. Faced with litigation and documents he could not explain away, the landlord reinstated the agreement and covered Alara's additional legal costs. Cassian helped only when she requested a contact for commercial permits. Cassian handled Victor through the family's legal counsel instead of using the methods men like Victor expected from him. He removed Victor's voting authority, opened an internal audit, and ordered every future business decision to pass through legitimate contracts and outside counsel. Theo watched him sign the final document. A year ago, this meeting would have ended differently. Cassian set down the pen. A year ago, I mistook fear for loyalty. It was the first clear sign that Alara had not merely changed the way he loved. She had changed the kind of empire he was willing to lead. 3 days later, she stood inside the restored restaurant space surrounded by boxes, vegetables, and 20 pounds of potatoes that needed peeling before the test dinner. Cassian arrived in a black coat, glanced at the work, and waited. Alara held out a peeler. Do you know how irritating your new respect for boundaries is? He removed his watch. I was told it was healthy. It is. You can still help. Cassian rolled up his sleeves and examined the potato like a hostile negotiation. 10 minutes later, he had removed more potato than skin. Alara laughed, stepped behind him, and guided his hand. Less force. His eyes met hers over his shoulder. You keep telling me that. You keep needing to hear it. He turned slowly, flour from an open bag dusting the edge of her cheek. Alara realized then that she did not love him because he could rescue her. She loved him because when she asked to stand on her own, he was learning to stand beside her. Cassian lifted the peeler. How many more? Alara pointed toward 4 full crates. For the first time in his life, the most powerful man in the city looked genuinely afraid. By midnight, Quinn's table looked less like a restaurant and more like the aftermath of a very polite disaster. Flour covered the counters, peeled potatoes filled 3 metal bowls, and Theo had somehow ruined a tray of dinner rolls without ever touching the oven controls. He lifted one of the blackened pieces and studied it with concern. This feels personal. Mrs. Vale took it from his hand and dropped it into the trash. Bread has standards. Alara laughed from the prep station while Cassian stood beside the sink in a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, washing pans with the intense concentration of a man defusing something dangerous. You missed a spot, she called. Cassian examined the skillet. Where? I don't know. I just wanted to see how seriously you'd take it. His eyes narrowed, but the corner of his mouth betrayed him. The night before opening was supposed to feel triumphant. Instead, it felt human, messy, exhausting, and held together by people who had chosen to stay. Love rarely proves itself during candlelit dinners. More often, it reveals its shape at 1 in the morning, when someone is tired enough to leave but reaches for another. Dish towel instead. Theo opened the refrigerator, stared inside, and frowned. Who moved the cream? You drank it, Mrs. Vale replied. That was coffee creamer. It was labeled heavy cream. The label was emotionally misleading. Cassian pointed toward the dining room. Go arrange chairs before she removes you from the building. Theo left carrying 2 chairs and an expression of wounded dignity. The room quieted after him. Alara finished tying boxes of herbs, then noticed Cassian still at the sink. He had removed his watch hours earlier. Without the jacket and the guards nearby, he looked younger, less protected. She stepped behind him and folded his damp cuff higher on his arm. Cassian went still beneath the touch. You're tired. So are you. I'm allowed. This is my opening. He turned slowly, leaving only a narrow space between them. That's what frightens me. Alara's hand remained against his forearm. The restaurant. Everything after it. His voice lost its usual certainty. One day you may decide my life is too complicated, too public, too close to things you never asked for. She studied his face. Cassian could intimidate a room without effort, yet asking to be chosen still made him vulnerable. I'm afraid too. Of me. Of disappearing inside your world. Her honesty struck deeper than reassurance would have. I spent years putting other people first. I won't become someone's beautiful secret, Cassian, or another responsibility you manage. He lifted his hand, but waited before touching her cheek. I don't want you smaller. Then don't love me like I need to be contained. I'm trying not to. Fear does not vanish when love becomes real. It simply loses the right to make every decision. Alara leaned into his palm. And I'm trying to believe you. Cassian kissed her slowly, with none of the urgency that had once lived between them. The kiss deepened only when she pulled him closer. His hand settled at her waist. Hers moved against the back of his neck. Every pause gave them room to stop, and every choice brought them nearer. When he whispered her name, it carried no claim, only wonder. They finished the final preparations together, locked the restaurant, and left long after Theo and Mrs. Vale had gone home. Later, inside Alara's apartment, the door closed behind them, and the rest of the night belonged to 2 adults who trusted each other enough not to rush what they had spent months building. At 7 the next morning, they returned to the restaurant carrying coffee and wearing the quiet smiles of people who had no intention of explaining themselves. Theo looked at Cassian's crooked collar, then wisely examined the floor. Before he could make a comment, a city inspector entered through the front door, opened a leather folder, and surveyed the unfinished room. I need to speak with the owner. Cassian instinctively stepped forward, then stopped. He looked at Alara instead. The choice was hers now, and everyone in the room was waiting to see whether he had truly learned how to let her make it. The health inspector looked past Alara toward Cassian, clearly assuming the most powerful man in the room must also be the owner. Cassian remained where he stood. It was a small act of restraint, but Alara understood what it cost him. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped forward. Quinn's table belongs to me. What do you need? The inspection itself went smoothly. Refrigeration temperatures were correct, storage areas were labeled, and the kitchen met every requirement. The problem appeared when the inspector searched for her operating permit. The approval existed, but its permit number had been attached to the wrong business profile in the city's system. Without verification, she could not legally open. Theo quietly reached for his phone. Mrs. Vale pressed his hand back onto the counter without looking at him. Let her work. Alara opened the confirmation email on her laptop, produced the payment receipt, and gave the inspector the case number from her original application. Cassian's jaw tightened. One phone call from him could have pressured the right office, and everyone in the room knew it. Alara looked at him once. He did not offer influence. He only waited to be asked. Love does not always prove itself by opening doors. Sometimes, it proves itself by standing beside someone while they find a key. The inspector called his supervisor, compared the confirmation number with the city record, and received authorization to correct the profile. After 20 tense minutes, he closed his tablet. Your permit is valid. You can open. The kitchen erupted. Theo lifted Alara off the floor before remembering Cassian was watching and immediately set her down. Professional celebration. Cassian folded his arms. Put the owner down, Theo. Already done. Theo stepped back and adjusted his jacket. No boundaries were permanently harmed. Above the entrance, the new sign read Quinn's Table in simple gold lettering. Not Moretti. Not a name borrowed from Power. Hers. Cassian stood beneath it for one quiet moment, and Alara saw pride in his face without ownership beside it. The restaurant filled before noon. Families crowded the tables. Neighborhood workers ordered lunch, and the first child to receive a free meal carefully saved half his cookie for his younger sister. Serafina arrived with flowers that would not trigger Alara's allergies. Theo ordered the most expensive steak, then announced that friendship should include complimentary dining. Mrs. Vale placed the check directly into his hand. Friendship should also include tipping. Cassian took a small table at the back and waited while Alara greeted guests, corrected orders, and moved through the room with the confidence of a woman finally standing inside her own dream. He never asked her to sit. He understood the day did not belong to him. When the final customer left, Alara carried one last plate to his table, the same basil and lemon pasta she had served him on the night they met. Cassian tasted it, then looked up. Still as good as the first time. She sat across from him. No, it's better. Why? Because this time, I didn't cook it in your house. There was no rejection in her voice. Only pride. Cassian glanced around the restaurant she had built without his name, then returned his attention to her. May I keep sitting at this table for the next few years? Alara's smile came slowly. You may. Relief softened his features. She reached across and covered his hand with hers. But I have one condition. Cassian turned his palm beneath hers, holding on without tightening his grip. Name it. Alara leaned closer, and for the first time, the man who controlled half the city looked nervous about a request he could not buy his way out of. Alara's condition was simple enough to sound harmless and important enough to change the way Cassian lived. 3 dinners a week, she told him, her hand still resting over his. No business calls. No security briefings at the table. No pretending you're listening while answering messages under the napkin. Cassian glanced at the phone hidden beside his knee. Alara raised one eyebrow. Theo, watching from across the empty restaurant, covered his mouth to hide a laugh. I was checking the time, Cassian offered. Your watch costs more than my first apartment. He surrendered the phone and placed it face down on the counter. 3 dinners. And no buying the restaurant next door because you dislike the owner. He overcharges for coffee. Cassian. Fine. 1 year later, Quinn's Table had become the kind of place people recommended without mentioning celebrities or expensive reservations. Alara's father, healthier now and finally free of the treatments that had consumed so much of their lives, occupied the corner table every Sunday. He always insisted on paying. Alara always returned the money by hiding it inside his coat pocket. Families celebrated birthdays there. Nurses stopped in after night shifts. Children whose parents could not afford a full meal still left with warm food and dessert wrapped for later. Alara finished culinary school and expanded the community dinner program. Cassian dismantled the family's remaining illegal operations and moved its money, employees, and influence into legitimate real estate, shipping, and hospitality companies. The process cost him allies and created enemies, but he refused to build a future with Alara on foundations he would be ashamed to explain. She had never demanded a cleaner version of him. Loving her had simply forced him to decide what kind of man he wanted to become. Change made only to keep someone is fragile. Change chosen with open eyes has a chance to last. There. Life together was not perfect. Cassian still turned every minor inconvenience into a security concern. Alara still accused him of treating grocery lists like military operations. Theo remained convinced he deserved free meals for introducing emotional chaos into their lives. Mrs. Vale continued to correct all of them. But happiness rarely looks impressive from the outside. Most of the time, it looks like ordinary people choosing patience after a long day. On the second anniversary of the restaurant, Cassian arrived early and insisted on cooking the pasta from the night they met. Alara watched him from the doorway as he ruined one batch, oversalted the second, and nearly set a kitchen towel on fire. People fear you in 3 states, she reminded him. None of them have seen this. He finally carried 2 plates to their usual table. The pasta was too soft and the sauce uneven, but Alara ate every bite. Cassian studied her with unusual nervousness, then placed a simple ring beside her fork. No photographers waited. No musicians appeared. There were no diamonds scattered across the floor, because Alara would have made him clean them up. I used to think loving someone meant keeping them close enough that nothing could take them away. His thumb brushed the edge of the ring. You taught me that love is giving someone the freedom to leave, then living in a way that makes them want to return. Alara looked at the man who once believed every kindness came with a price. Is that your proposal? It's my best attempt. The pasta needs work. Alara. She smiled and slipped the ring onto her finger. Yes. They married 6 months later inside Quinn's table. Serafina signed as a witness. Theo nearly dropped the rings into a pot of soup. Mrs. Vale cried and blamed the onions. Beneath the head table, the orange cat Cassian still claimed not to own slept through the entire ceremony on a cushion that had clearly been purchased for him. During dinner, Alara sat beside Cassian instead of serving him, and the man who had once ignored every beautiful woman in the room could not look away from her. She had never conquered him. She had done something better. She had shown him that real love did not demand surrender, shrink a dream, or turn care into control. It gave 2 people enough safety to remain fully themselves and still choose the same table. Cassian owned buildings across the city, but only when Alara reached for his hand beneath that small restaurant table did he finally understand what it meant to have a home.